All right, so here in Photoshop, I want to talk about a couple things. I want to show you guys a few things in here, and I'm going to start with an image that you basically have been working on all along in this. So this is going to be a little all over the place, but I will get back to the Nick stuff in just a second, but I want to show you something here first. So when I look at this image right now, for me, it's, again, this is a retouched version of it. It's not in its entirety. It's not complete. It doesn't have the hair patch in there. There's a couple things that are missing in here, but that's not really what I want to go after here. What I want to talk about here is how you guys actually boost contrast in an image. So how do you guys typically boost contrast in an image? Levels, curves, everybody basically, it's sort of a version of the same thing. I'm going to actually add an adjustment curve on top of this guy. There's built-in versions of adding contrast, so I'm just going to do a medium contrast. You see it's an S-shaped curve, and this is ultimately what you get in the image. And the problem that I have with this is a couple fold things right here. Number one is it perverts the color, and this is again something we've talked about here over and over and over again. When I added the contrast, it actually makes the darker tones darker, the lighter tones lighter, which does introduce contrast, but it also completely changes the color. It saturated the color in her face. It actually really perverts the color in her hair. You can see if I turn this guy on and off that that's what happens here. Again, this is a limitation that we have in working in RGB color. When you use an RGB curve, it changes tone, but it also changes color. Those two are inextricably tied together. It is not an LAB image where you have separated tone in the L channel by itself and all of your color is in the AB channels. So we can mitigate this somewhat by actually changing the blending mode of this curve from normal down to luminosity. So this is a better version of it now. It actually builds in contrast, but it doesn't pervert the color, and it's reasonably well done. However, the problem that I've got here is that unless you're really, really, really good with adjusting your curves, it gets to be difficult to really get a satisfying image out of this for me. That's just my line on here. Yes. Yeah, I did. Thank you. Yes. Now that I say that, let me check. But yes, I'm pretty sure I did. Yeah. Okay, so I want to show you guys the way I do contrast. And now, like everything else that we've done in this class, we're going to do this on essentially a beauty shot here, that one of mine. But I have had people, and I do the same thing here, I've had people use this method of adding contrast to do food, to do landscapes, to do interiors. There's no reason that you cannot use this method to do this on everything. And actually, all of you guys can do this same thing with me, so let's do this together. I'm going to put this image up into the folder. It'll just be on the front end of the folder. So there's a Skin Eyes Retouch that I just put in our server folder. If you guys can grab that and download it and open it up and tell me, hopefully you can get it open. You cannot get into the server? No. Oh, all right. Could you show him really quickly?
Oh, I see. Different locations. Yeah, if you go to the website, you find the locations.
So wait, go to your Finder, do what? Is it the Go menu?
No, it's on the left side. If you scroll down, where it says like
down here where like your hard drives and stuff
Oh.
are listed. Yeah.
Yeah, down here, this part,
Yep,
where it
and
says
it'll
the
be- yep.
TCal part.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so it's mounting it already for you. That's why.
yeah,
Got it.
I took the video of it.
You cannot copy it? How about everybody else? Anybody else able to copy this thing? Did it open? The what? The older version doesn't work. I'll take a look and see if I can't get the filters out of the installer, and you might be able to just drop into Photoshop. I'll check into that. Did everybody other than Amanda get this? Anybody else not? Hang on, Amanda. I'll give you. No, but here, I can give it to you really quick on a little jump drive. Actually, I'm going to. Yeah, we'll do it on a jump drive. Anytime. You want to come grab this? You got regular USB, right? That. So it's on that drive. Are you supposed to have what? You can leave all that. Did it work? All right. So everybody else has this. Everybody has this open. True. All right. So here we go. Back into Photoshop. So the first thing we're going to do is actually simply load the luminosity of this. First off, I'm going to throw away the curve that I added on here. So we need to do a merge stamp version of this. Right now I've got what I'm looking at here is pixel content, pixel retouching, tonal retouching. I've got all of that's going on here. If you select your very top layer on this and then hold down your Command, Option, Shift, and the letter E, it will actually do a merge stamp version of this all the way up to the top, which is what we need. Did that work for everyone? So again, if you're on Windows, it's Control, not Command. But again, Command, Option, Shift, and the letter E. You get a merge stamp version of this at the very top. That's got all of the retouching is all included into this one single image or one single layer. Good? Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is hover over the composite. I want to do this over the RGB. Some people who do this same trick will use the green channel. We should look at this really quickly. First off, click on your red channel. Yeah. Have you selected the very top layer first? Because it'll put it above whatever you've got selected. So if you select the bottom layer, it sticks it in the middle of the layer stack. So if we take a look at the red channel, now this is generalizations here, guys. This is not like law here, but generalizations. You can use these things though to your advantage. So to just think about this stuff. In general, the red channel represents contrast. If you then click on the green channel represents detail. And then finally, if you click on the blue channel represents noise. So when you're working with these things after you reach the point like we have right now where you want to do some specific work, a lot of times when people are trying to soften an image, for instance like this, and they want to do the more down and dirty filter version of this, instead of blurring the entire image, they'll simply go in and they'll blur the blue channel because that's where the noise is. So they'll soften that part of it without softening the entire image. Does that sort of make sense? You don't touch the green channel, which is your detail, and you don't touch the contrast, which is in the red channel. So it's just kind of a generalization. However, this is all modeled after our after our eyes. Your eyes are more sensitive to green than they are to red and to blue, on the order of about twice as sensitive. So that's where you find detail. So some people will do the trick I'm going to show you using detail. I don't. I do it using the luminosity of the entire image. So for me, I can simply load the luminosity of the RGB channel. So I'm selecting the RGB channel all the way at the very top. Hover your cursor over the thumbnail, the color thumbnail of the RGB part, hold down the command key and click, and it will load the luminosity as a selection. But now you need to think, what is this really loaded? So again, it is loaded the luminosity. If you save this, so come up to the select menu and save this selection, and we're just going to call it luminosity, and say OK to that. Command D to deselect, and then scroll down and look at it. You can see it's just basically a black and white version of your image. But the thing that you need to remember about this is that just like layer masks, when we load this stuff, areas that are lighter here are more fully loaded as a selection than areas that are dark. So to see how this works, you can throw that luminosity channel away. I was just going to show you what it was really doing. Hover over the thumbnail of the RGB guy again, hold down the command key and click. Essentially, we have loaded the highlights of this image. That's what we've loaded. If you come over to your layer stack right now, we are going to jump the highlights to their own layer, Command J. If you then hold down your Option key and click on that new layer that you just added, you will see that what has largely been added are the highlights. You can see that the shirt is much more so there than, look at her eyes. The eyes are totally transparent. Her eyebrows, the pupils in her eyes, those are completely transparent because they're not loaded at all, because they're the darker parts of the image. The lighter part of the images are actually here. So you can see the highlight, the spectral highlight that's on her lip is fully selected here. The majority of her collar, if not almost all of it, has been selected. A little bit less in the darker areas of the shirts here, whatever. But this represents the highlights of the image. Does that make sense to everyone? So we're going to rename that layer and call it highlights. So I will show you. Back, you have the composite image at the very top, correct? Hover over the RGB composite of the channel, hover over the thumbnail, hold down the command key and click. You've just loaded the highlights of the image. Come back over to your layers palette and just hit Command J. That will actually jump the highlights to their own layer. And if you hold down the Option key and click on the eyeball, you will see all you have up there on that layer now are highlights. Did that work? Okay, so we now have the highlights. Now we need to build the shadows. We need to grab the shadows. So to do that, turn off this highlight layer, turn the eyeball off, turn the eyeball on for that layer number one, the composite, and make sure that it is selected. Because if you do all this work on the highlight layer, it will do nothing because we don't have any shadows on the highlight layer. So again, make sure you have reselected the full merge stamp version layer. The highlight layer is actually turned off at the top. I'm going to go back and do the same thing. Hover your cursor over the thumbnail of the RGB, hold down the command key and click. We've now loaded the highlights. In order to get the shadows, we are going to select the inverse. So come up to your select menu and come down to inverse. Now you don't really see a lot of change in the marching ants, but believe me, things are different. And now we are going to jump this to its own layer, Command J. And if you take a look at it now by holding down the Option key and clicking on the eyeball, you can see that the shirt is not selected. The shirt is almost completely transparent. Her pupils of her eyes are almost 100% selected. And then some of her skin is selected. So these are, again, this is basically dealing with the shadow area of this image. And you need to rename that layer and call it shadows. Then you need to, let me rename my highlights. We need to put shadows. I'm going to go ahead and turn on highlights as well. As a matter of fact, I'm going to turn both of them on. Select highlights, hold down your shift key and select shadows. We need to put these two into a group together. So again, all I've selected is the highlight version that I made and the shadow layer that I made. Come up to the flyout menu on the top right across from the tab that says layers and click on the drop down menu, and you want to do new group from layers. And in this, we're just going to call this contrast. Shoot.
So, you know all these like pathways that we use all the time? Why would you not make these all active?
Oh, you would.
Oh, okay.
Oh no! I'm going to give you an action set today that will absolutely stun you. It'll make you. It's depressing because you realize just how much you still have to learn. Yeah. Okay. All right. So open up the contrast group because it'll put it into the group and it'll collapse it. We need to change the blending modes of our highlights and our shadows. So I'm going to do the highlights first. So select the highlights that are inside it, make it active, and we're going to change its blending mode from normal down to screen. Screen is actually going to make those lighter, but what I'm doing now is I'm specifically making only the highlights lighter. Unlike doing screen on a full copy of the image that would impact everything, I've copied the highlights to their own layer. So this is having a huge impact on the shirt, on the whites of her eyes, the spectral highlight on her lip, but it's having zero impact on the pupils of her eyes because those are not a part of this layer. Then I'm going to do the opposite for the shadows. Go ahead and select the shadows layer, and we're going to change its blending mode to multiply. Multiply and screen are the exact opposite from one another. They are the inverse of one another. So this is clearly built in a significant amount of contrast into this image without perverting its color at all. However, and this is not a hardcore rule, this is a general rule. Usually when I am doing this, I need the strength that I'm doing on my highlights to be double what I'm doing to the shadows. You can see when I did that multiply, it really brings in, it hits those shadows awfully hard in here. Especially I look at her cheeks, that kind of stuff here, that seems like that's parts like way overdone. So to get to that 1:2 ratio, make sure that you've got your shadows layer selected and drop its opacity down to 50%. So now what I've got is a situation where I've got a 50% bump in my shadows and a 100% bump in my highlights. That's the 2:1 ratio that I was talking about. The reason I put this into a group is that because now that I've established that 2:1 relationship between shadows and highlights, I can use opacity of the entire group to fine-tune the contrast. So if I think that this is too contrasty right now, I simply drop the opacity of the group. But I'm maintaining that double hit of highlight to single hit of shadow relationship and I can use opacity to take it all the way down to nothing to completely eliminate it. But this is how I actually do contrast. So for me, in looking at my image, I actually feel like 100% is a little pretty hard of a hit on there, but I can bring this down to around 80%, and that seems correct to me. And then simply turn your contrast group on and off, and you can see what it's actually done. I don't know anybody who goes back to doing contrast any other way. Every single person that I've showed this to ends up doing this from now on exactly like this. It total game changer. It makes for a really beautiful image. Okay, so now that I've gotten this part going, I like that. You can actually throw away the layer number 1, that sort of merge stamp version. You can turn everybody else back on because you need everybody else back on. So the contrast group is affecting the entire thing. However, what I want to show you now is selective sharpening. So in doing selective sharpening, so I've thrown away the first of the composite. I need to do another composite now that's actually got this contrast built into it. I'm moving now towards my final image. So again, when we've talked about the sort of stacking order that we do all of this in, we start out with pixel work first, followed by tonal work, followed by color, followed by liquify, and finally output sharpening happens at the very end. So we are moving into the output sharpening phase of all of this. So I've got everything looking the way I want it to look, and now I simply need to sharpen this depending on my output. So the first thing that I need to do is actually do a composite of this. Again, a merge stamp version. So with the contrast group selected at the very top, hold down your Command, Option, Shift, and hit the letter E to do a merge stamp version, because this merge stamp at the very top is going to be my sharpening layer. So I'm going to double click on this guy and I'm going to call it sharpening. I'm also going to change this to a smart object because that will allow me to go in and change my sharpening once I've saved the image. Because again, you need to think about sharpening. Sharpening, depending on your destination, changes. So if you are sharpening for screen, so if this is going to be for your website, it's what it looks like on your screen right now. So if you feel like this needs to be sharpened for your website, you would go ahead and do it at this stage of the game. However, if you are going to print, it is a completely different amount of sharpening. And the thing that you need to think about with print is this. There is no way to preview the amount of sharpening that you do for print. You cannot do it. You can look at your screen, but what happens with print is this. When you think about a piece of paper going through and ink being sprayed out onto the piece of paper, what happens is that paper acts like a sponge, and when that ink actually hits the piece of paper, it can bleed into the surrounding area. That's called dot gain. So printers will talk about dot gain all the time, and it's different for different papers. So if you are using a matte paper, it's got a much higher dot gain than glossy paper. So what happens is that the finish or the surface on a glossy paper is really tight. When ink hits it, it doesn't spread very much. That's why you get more detail in a glossy print than you can actually get in a matte print. With a matte piece of paper, the finish on it, the fibers that sit up on the top of that are not as pressed as tight. And so what happens there is that the same amount of ink goes out and hits that piece of paper, and it spreads out more, and that softens your image. So what you do when you're printing, whether it's glossy or matte, it's just two different settings. But for matte surface, whatever, for all of them, you end up over sharpening your image so that when the dot gain softens your image, you've canceled the two out, and you end up with what you have on your screen on your paper. But what you will find when you print is that your print should always look over sharpened on your screen, because you are trying to compensate for the softening that dot gain is going to introduce when you actually print it out. Does that make sense, everybody? There's other things that are involved in this. So, does anybody here have a picture, an image, anything, magazine, anything that's got an image? Great. Can I borrow it really quick? Sure. All right, so Sophie, you're going to be my test subject right here. Okay, so you look at this thing, it looks relatively sharp, right? Relatively. How about here? Can't fucking tell a thing, right? Again, what's changing here? So I'm here really, really super close. You can see this image. You can actually see probably the grain in it, that kind of stuff. But I come way back here. Here, I'll do it even better. I'll come right forward here. You can't see anything, right? Why? So do this. Hold your thumb out like this. Close one eye and cover this image with your thumb. Can you completely cover with your thumb?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Sophie's half-inch thumb is covering an 8 by 11, 8.5 by 11 print. Why? How can that possibly happen? This print is distant, so it's actually small. The further away this gets, the smaller it is. That's why when we look at billboards, we see billboards, they're not. Billboard that you see is not 100 feet wide and 50 feet tall. It's probably like this size. It's 8.5 and 11 value when we're looking at it in the car. Right? So distance controls the size. Size is also controls how sharp this thing has to be. The smaller it is, the less sharpening it is. The bigger it is, the more sharpening it actually needs. So all of these things become a calculus in your sharpening. And everybody's basically, you guys have probably been taught the way you do output sharpening. How many of you guys do half-ass sharpening for all of your sharpening for your prints? Right? So they gave you the magic formula, one-hit wonder. How do the rest of you guys sharpen? You don't. You just print that shit and it's soft and you say, well, this is my art and it's cool. And then as long as I make it big enough, people will believe it's fine art and I'm off to the races, right? If only that were true. All right, so I'm going to show you what you do instead. First off, I'm going to make this a smart object. So up to the layer menu. Up to the layer menu, down to smart objects, convert to smart object. Because again, I want to be able to change this for different outputs. So then I'm going to show you the first of the Nik filters that I use, and I use this one religiously. This used to be the only one that I ever owned. This is the only one I ever bought. So if you come up to the filter menu for me, down to the Nik collection, you will see this is the whole group of filters that you've got. There are two versions of sharpening in here. One is a pre-sharpen, the other is an output sharpening. Pre-sharpening only happens for raw files. And again, most people are already doing this inside of Camera Raw or doing it in Capture One or in Lightroom. So most people are pre-sharpening there. Pre-sharpening is a way that you can undo the softening that demosaicing introduces when your raw file is processed. So when your raw file gets processed, unfortunately there is an inherent softening that happens to that image, and pre-sharpening takes care of that. It actually gets rid of that. However, output sharpening is a completely different thing. Output sharpening is all about where is this thing going? Is it going to be on screen? Is it going to be a print? Is it going to be a big print, a small print? Is it going to be a matte print? Is it going to be, anyway, all the above. And distance, all of that comes into this calculus. So if you use the Nik filter set and do it for output sharpening, it will function on a smart object. It brings you up into a whole nother space. And this is basically what it looks like. And you can see from the top down, when we work from this, your output sharpening, you have a drop-down menu and you can say, I want this to go to a display. This would be for your website. I want this to go to an inkjet printer. This would be for inkjet. Then the resolution of your, then going down further down here in terms of the type of paper, click on this drop-down menu. Are we going to do this on plain paper, matte, glossy, surface, whatever? I'm going to pick luster for mine. The resolution of your printer will have some impact on the sharpening. If we're doing this on the Canon printers that are out there, those are 1440 by 1440. Then the actual strength of the sharpening and the structure of this can all be controlled with these sliders right here. Let me make this thing bigger. So all of this is actually controlled here. In terms of the viewing, it's set to auto, but you can actually change this. This is your viewing distance. up to 2 feet. Up to 2 feet is arm's length. That is a print that you would be holding. However, something that is 10 feet in size, again, distance-wise, that's going to be considerably bigger for you to be able to actually see it. Does that make sense, everyone, what's going on? So these are all variables that you introduce into this filter, and it uses that to calculate the sharpening that you're ultimately going to get, and it is remarkable. I've never seen this thing create halos, which is the biggest problem most people get into with sharpening. But at any rate, so I'm going to go ahead and say I'm going to leave it on auto, because what auto's doing is it's actually looking at the size of the print and saying, how big is this print? Yes. Yes. So what do you mean if you don't have it? I just gave it to you. You can't load anything on these computers. These are locked down by IT, but you don't care about this computer. You care about the one you have at home. So you're going to put this on the one you have at home and you'll be good to go. Actually, these may exist on this computer. Now that I say that, go up to the filter menu and they haven't put it on here. You can try other and see if it's there. No, they should be loaded on here. Ironically, all right, so wait, you guys know if you're shooting in the studio, whenever you launch Photoshop in the studio, that annoying little screen that comes up in the very beginning, it looks like a little small window in black and white. That is the NIC interface for all of it. So the computers at the studio have it on it. So anyway, of course they don't put it on the ones in the digital lab, right? That would be too easy. So I'm going to go ahead and say okay to this. And then you can actually see what it's done. So if I zoom in here to take a peek at this, I'm going to invert my mask on the smart filter, and you can see the difference. And it's massive. Right? I mean, you can certainly see the difference in this, right? So that's the NIC filter. However, this doesn't go far enough. And the reason I say that this doesn't go far enough is that you need to consider what's really going on with your image. So for you guys, you're not going to be able to do this, but you will be able to do something else. So I'm going to get rid of my Sharpener Pro, and we're actually going to just do this using another filter. So again, has everybody got this merged into a single layer on here? Are we good about that part? Yeah. All right, so we are going to, and you've turned it into a smart object? Yeah. All right, so come up to your filter menu, down to sharpen. The other sharpening that I would use, I used to use a lot of unsharp mask, but now instead I would use Smart Sharpen because it actually is smart. So with Smart Sharpen, a dialog box will actually open up. You can make this a little bit larger. And then again, I would simply check the amounts of this. I'm going to pretty much get close to her face. So I have got an amount of 200 right now. I'm actually going to bump that 200 up to, I'm going to over sharpen this image. I'm going to hit this up. I'm going to really whack this. I'm going to do an amount of 500%, and I'm going to go to 2 on my radius. And you can see it's way over sharpened this image. That's fine. We're good on this part. Go ahead and say okay to that. And you can see this is like almost reticulated, this image. I mean, that's how sharp this guy is. That part's okay. I wanted to overdo it because I want to show you how I'm going to ultimately go about doing this part. So again, this layer is dedicated only to sharpening. The next thing I want to do is I want to create a layer mask of her skin. So to do that, I'm going to come up to the select menu, down to color range. When the color range dialog box opens up, if your image, your large image looks normal, it's because you've got this selection preview set to none. I am going to grab the first of the eyedropper tools, the one that's to the underneath the OK, select whatever, and I'm going to simply click on her face. Once you get her face selected, you can actually change your selection preview from none down to grayscale. This will then allow you to see her face that we're actually, it gives you a bigger preview. So I need to select more of her skin. I've got my fuzziness set at 21 right now. If you want your image to look pretty much like mine, go ahead and set yours to 21. I'm then going to select the second of the eyedropper, the one in the middle. It's an eyedropper that has a little plus underneath it. This allows me to extend the color. If I continue to use the original eyedropper, what it'll do, well here, I'll show you. If I click the original eyedropper, if I select another place on her skin, it selects that, but it gets rid of the original selection. And every new place that I click on, it just does a new selection. I want to add to the selection that I've already got. So I'm going to click on the second of the eyedropper tools, which will then, instead of changing my selection, it'll simply build and add on to the one that I'm using. You don't need to just click. You can actually click and drag across the image, and you'll see it will build more of it. I'm going to go after the shadow areas that are on her cheek as well, and this gets me pretty close to the selection that I'm looking for. However, I can bump my fuzziness now up to actually clean up. I don't want to do that. I'm going to leave it pretty much the way it is right now. So I'm going to stick with that, the fuzziness somewhere in the 20s, and I'm going to simply say OK to this. Then I'm going to save that selection up to the select menu, down to save selection, and I'm going to call this skin mask. Yep. So I've saved this. That is reasonably well. We're going to have to do some other work on it, but reasonably good. So if I take a look now at the mask that I've just built, my skin mask part right here, I need to do some more work on this part to actually finish it up. Now this work doesn't need to be anywhere near as specific as the stuff that we are doing in other places. So I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush. I'm going to hit the D key to default my foreground and background colors to black and white. I'm going to use the bracket keys next to the P key to actually make my brush a little bit larger. I'm going to also change the edge of my brush. I'm going to leave it probably a little bit higher, around 70–80%. I want some pretty good control on this part. And then I'm simply going to come in here very loosely, and I'm going to paint all the areas that are already white. You want to avoid her eyes. I'm really just looking to get her skin. You can get the shadow that's underneath her chin. That's all skin in there. You don't need to be perfect about this. Do not include her mouth. Her mouth actually needs to change. Also, do not include her nostrils. Her nostrils need to stay dark as well. But I'm basically going around this part. Again, you can be pretty loose about all of this. I'm going to run my way back up here. This would be a great time for a tablet if I had brought one, but I didn't. Make my brush a little bit smaller to get above her eyes. Again, you want to leave the eyelashes, you want to leave all the hair, you want to leave all of her eyes, you want to leave her mouth and her nostrils. The rest of it you can actually... And again, I'm just going after skin. Alright, I'm going to try to take a shortcut here. We'll see how well this whole thing works. Because I feel like I've gotten her skin pretty good in this. I'm going to use the magic wand right now. So come up over to your selection group, the tool group on the far right side. It is the fourth tool down. It's where quick selection tool is, but it is the magic wand tool. I'm going to click on the magic wand tool. I'm going to set my sample size to 3x3. Yours should be pretty close to that. I'm going to drop the tolerance way down. I only want this thing to pick this white that I've already selected here. So I'm going to drop the tolerance down to probably 3 or 4, somewhere in there. And then I'm simply going to click on the white that's in the center to see. And it's making a very good selection of this white part. I feel good about where this is happening. However, what I really want is I want everything else in the image to be black. I want this to stay white. I want everything else to be black. So I am going to invert the selection. So up to, because right now the white has been selected. What I want is everything but the white. So up to the select menu, down to inverse, everything else is selected. Black is my background color, so the keyboard shortcut to fill with your background color is Command or Control, Delete or Backspace, depending on whether you're on Windows or not. And it actually gives me this, Command D to deselect. And this is going to be my skin mask. The problem that I've got with this, though, is that this is actually going to show the skin and hide everything else. I want the exact opposite of this, so I'm going to invert this skin mask. Command I inverts it. Now when I use this mask, it will protect the skin that I've spent all of this time smoothing out that sharpening undoes. Sharpening gets rid of all that smoothing. I want to keep it. So I'm going to use this mask. I'm simply going to hover over the thumbnail of my skin mask, Command click to load it as a selection. Then I'm going to go back over to my sharpening layer and I'm going to apply it as a layer mask. So now what's happening is, if you zoom in to take a look at this, you will see that the eyes and the area right around the eyes are radically over sharpened, but the skin is beautifully smooth. This is what we were hoping to have here. So this part's working great, but I still have got the eyes and the hair and her lips and her nostrils. All of that is over sharpened. So then you simply use your opacity slider for the sharpening layer to drop it down to the point that you feel like the sharpening is done correctly. So I'm going to continue to drop mine down. And I'm getting down to around a 30% on mine. And I'm turning that on and off, and that seems to me to be about right. Probably can take a little bit more, so crank it up to a 40%. We'll see what that looks like. If you feel like the reticulation is a little too strong in here, which I do feel like it is, because this is a smart filter, you can double click on Smart Sharpen, open it up, and I would drop the radius down to a 1. That'll take care of a lot of that reticulation look in there. Yeah, that it makes it, it's not as large, as broad in here as it normally is. And then you could probably bring the opacity back up a little bit more. Yeah. So selective sharpening in here, guys. So what do you sharpen? You sharpen the high frequency work. What do you keep soft? The low frequency work. Make sense? Questions about this part? Are we good? Okay. You can close that up. You don't need to save it. Oh, I'm going to open this back up again. Really quickly. Merge stamp version of this. Just to give you a quick run through on here. The other filters that are in the Nick collection group right here. Analog Effects Pro, this is a grain emulator. So, Robin, this is exactly what you were looking for right here. And if you take a look at it, you'll actually see that there are different effects. I mean, you can think of this like Instagram filters, but you can be really sort of judicious in all of this. I'm going to go down. Again, I don't use this very much, so I'm going to look through this part right here. This looks like it's more than a grain emulator, though. This looks like it's more of a camera fuck up here to make it look like almost more like Polaroid stuff. This actually looks like this is cross-processed right here. So this is not the grain emulator that I was just going to suggest to you. But let me see what else we've got in here. There is a black and white version of this, and these would be grain emulators. So these are different film grain emulators in all of this. You can kind of explore your way through this and see if there's something in here that gets closer to what you're looking for. But yeah. So, and there's all sorts of, like if you take a drop down on the film type here, there's all sorts of things that you can do. Again, you can really modify the grain itself. It gives you a lot more control than just adding noise. So anyway, that's one of the filters that's in the Nick group. I'm going to cancel out of here really quickly. Go to the next one down. Color Effects Pro. This is something that's really more for people who don't know how to actually do color corrective work, and they just want the sort of before and after part. So For instance, you can look at bleach processing on here. You can look at cross processing on here. There is vintage grain effects in here. So this is a lot like, again, the filters that you would use in Instagram. However, all of these have controls on them. So you can start in this part and then you can go in and modify these parts. So that's the next of the filters. Define is actually noise reduction. HDR Effects Pro used to be the best HDR way to put stuff together. Does anybody in this room doing HDR? All right, then I'm not going to show you anything more. Again, we already talked about sharpening, pre-sharpening, and output sharpening. Silver Effects Pro is probably a superior black and white to take an image and turn it into black and white. You probably have more control in here than you've got in using the black and white sliders that are actually in Photoshop. So that's what that one is. And then finally, this Visava is, again, it's a color correction issue in here. And I am not going to find any. Again, this is not something that I use, but it's something for you guys simply to be aware of. This is really looking only like tonal control in here, though. So at any rate, that's the filter set that I can give to you. And if you can get it to work, that's great. And if you can't get it to work, but you see stuff that you really like, then you can always pay for it. And the current version from DxO will work on anybody's. And I think it's like $120, I think, now with the DxO version of it. Okay, we can close that up. We don't need to save that part. What we do need to do is look and see what else I was supposed to be going over today. All right, so we did chroma key. We need to look at panoramas, focus stacking, apply image, and I doubt we'll get to calculations, but we'll look at it. Okay. So, we did not go over panoramas in this class yet, did we? Okay. So, if you take a look in your class projects, the weekly projects, I think this is in... It is in week number 13, so we're actually on schedule. So this is what we would be doing in week number 13. If you take a look inside your folder, inside for week number 13, there is another folder in there called Focus Stacking Images. If you click on that and then go, there's a couple of folders inside of that. There's also a PDF in here about the steps to do it. If you want to get into doing this focus stacking part, this is how you would actually shoot it and actually do the stack. If we take a look inside of our focus stacking number 1, you'll actually see, if I take a look at the first frame, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, there's 5 frames in here, and they are pictures of a ruler that was done in the studio. And you can see the first frame that I've got right here, it's got the focus is set almost at the 31-inch mark, so it's very close to the camera. But as we start to move on further back, certainly by the time you get to the 25-inch mark, it's very soft, and by the time you get back to in the teens, they're so soft you can't even read them. Yes? In an iPhone photo, what happens is that they're doing this stuff all the time. They are doing multiple images, so when you see that little live part that shows up on the iPhone, so you should know this about your iPhone. Do you know your iPhone is taking pictures right now? Your iPhone is never not taking pictures. What happens is that it never saves anything until you hit the shutter button. When you hit the shutter button, it then starts to save that from the point that you clicked the shutter button. It will save that 10 frames or that 15 frames. But that's how it can actually have images, because your iPhone, if you notice, there's actually stuff that you capture that's before you hit the shutter button. So your phone is constantly taking pictures, and what iPhone does when you hit the shutter button is that it grabs a group of images that start right before you actually hit the shutter button till right after you hit the shutter button. And it takes those 10 or 15 images and it reprocesses them. It will do HDR on them if you're looking to do that. If you use any of the like portrait mode, it introduces artificial depth of field. It actually does a does a knockout of the subject in that and then defocuses the background. All of that's happening in your phone and you have no control over it. All the time, and it's doing HDR all the time. That's how you get those incredible, you take a picture of, the sunset from inside your dark apartment, and all of a sudden you can see all of the detail of the walls of your dark apartment, but the beautiful sunset that's out the window, that's all done in post-processing inside your phone. And that's all kept. So you can shoot RAW, and depending on the phone that you have or the apps that you have, you can actually shoot a RAW file on your phone, on your iPhone. It will not look anything at all like the picture that you shoot of that's just when you pick up your iPhone and go into photos and shoot a picture. All of this is massively processed. That's what's happening. But that's not what we have here. So is everybody clear about what these images look like on mine? So Alex, this goes to what we were talking about earlier. So Alex is doing a lot of this, sort of taking a large group of images and combining them. But the problem that you run into when we do the combination thing that we're going to do right now, we lose the raw data. We don't get to keep the raw data. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me show you how to do the stack first, and then I'll show you how you can actually utilize the raw data first and then do the stack, which is the trick to doing all of this. So I'm going to go into Photoshop, and I'm going to come up to the very top, and I'm going to come down to, so I'm in Photoshop. You actually start in Photoshop with nothing open. Come up to your File menu, come down to Automate, and then down to the bottom to Photo Merge. I think this is where I want to go to, yeah. So File menu, down to Automate, down to Photo Merge. Click on that. It will bring open a dialog box. You now need to navigate to that folder. So again, if you click on the Browse button, you can then navigate to your week number 13. Actually, I take that back. This is going to be for doing panoramas. Hit cancel out of here really quickly. We're going to go for another one. Up to the File menu, down to Scripts, down to Load Files into Stack. So this is going to be for for focus stacking. So again, not the photo merge part. That's going to be for panorama. But for the focus stacking part, up to the File menu in Photoshop, down to Scripts, down to Load Files into Stack, and then you'll click on the Browse button, and then you need to navigate to your session number 13. Inside session number 13, inside your focus stacking files, inside the focus stacking folder 1, click on the very top of the raw files, hold down your shift key and click on the last one. It will skip over your XMP files. That's fine. We don't care about that part. You should have 5 files that are selected now, and simply click on Open. Then you'll go back into the layers, the source files part right here. Do not click on any of these other things. We can do these later, but for the time being right now, I want to go through this step by step so that you understand it all. And simply click OK. Don't check any of this, attempt to automatically align or create new smart object. Just click OK on this. So what this is going to do is it's going to take every one of those files and it's actually going to bring this in, and it looks like it's actually going to, we'll see if it does them all as smart objects. The very bottom one is a smart object. I don't want that to be a smart object, so I'm going to rasterize that bottom file. So I've simply clicked on that file, and I'm going to come up to the layer menu, down to rasterize, and rasterize the smart object. So now these are all files that have been brought into Photoshop. They're all visible. If I hold down, so the one that's at the very top was the one that we were looking at. You can see that the 31-inch mark is in focus. If you come down into the middle of the stack, so I'm going to come just somewhere in the middle, hold down the Option key and click on the eyeball. It'll turn everybody else off. And you can see now I have shifted my focus more to the middle of the ruler. This is more in that 25-inch mark. Again, the 30 and the 31 are soft. The teens are also soft. If I go down to the very bottom of my stack, hold down the Option key and click on that eyeball, you can see it's the focus that's in the very back of the image. With the very bottom image, though, selected, and then scroll up to the top, simply turn on the eyeball for your very top one. You can see that your focus shifts, but what's more problematic is that the image actually, the contents of the image changes sizes. That is not, look at what happens to the ruler. It actually totally changes sizes. It's not the same size. So even though I can focus stack this thing, every single image in here is a different size. Now this becomes problematic when you're actually doing macro work. It shows up more. It happens in every image that we take though. If you think about how you take an image, you put a camera up to your face and you focus it. So I'm going to focus right here on Alex, and he is a certain size of this. But then if I focus on Robin back behind him, his size is going to change because my lens actually changes its distance from my camera to Robin. Now, on a small scale, doing pictures of people in a room like this, you don't notice that. In macro, you really do notice it. You are actually moving the camera. When you focus it, not even though it's on a tripod, you're actually moving the lens either closer or further away from the subject to focus it. So it changes sizes. So my first thing that I've got to do here, I got to get all of these things to be the same size. So turn them all on. So turn all the eyeballs on for all of your image. Make sure that the bottom image layer is selected. Go up to the very top, hold down your Shift key and select the top one. You need to make sure that all of your images are selected. You also need to make sure that none of these are smart objects, because our next move right now is going to be a destructive move. So everybody's got all of their layers selected, correct? This is a two-step process. The first step is to align your layers. Go up to the Edit menu, come down to Auto Align Layers. So again, up to the Edit menu, down to Auto Align Layers. You'll notice that Auto Blend Layers is right underneath it. If you can't remember the order you need to do this in, start from the top and work your way down. So you auto align first. Go ahead and click on that. A dialog box will open up. In 99.9 times out of 10, auto will actually do this the best for you. So go ahead and make sure auto is selected. Click on OK. So it's actually done that work right now. To see how well this did work or not, turn off all of the eyeballs except for the one on the very top and the one on the very bottom. And then turn off the one on the top and the bottom. And you'll notice that the only thing that changes is focus now. Not size, but focus. So when I turn off my top layer, look what has actually happened. This is the bottom layer only. You can see it's actually resized the entire bottom layer of this to make it smaller so that it actually fits the very top layer. And this border that goes around, the checkerboard that goes around, those are transparent pixels. That's why you can't do this to a smart object, and it's why this is also destructive. Make sense to everyone? So then finally, again, turn all the eyeballs back on. Make sure that you've got all of the layers still selected. Mine are all still highlighted. Now we're going to do our next move. Up to the Edit menu, down to Auto Blend Layers, the one that's right under Auto Align. A dialog box will open up, and in this case you've got two options. You can do a panorama stack, which is not what we're doing right now, but the stack images, the one underneath it, is a focus stack. You want to go ahead and say, yep, I'm going to do the focus stack, and then you do want to do check marks on both the ones on the bottom. Seamless tones and colors, that will help blend this stuff together. And then content aware, fill transparent areas. So those transparent areas that showed up from the resizing will be filled using content aware, and simply say okay. So what this does, Command D to deselect, is it creates a composite of the focusing, and look at it on the top. This ruler is now sharp front to back. You will also have a layer that's up at the very top that is the composite of them all. If you turn that layer off, you've still got all of your other layers, but take a look at the layer masks that have actually been created for it. They're nuts. So I'm going to just hold down my Option key and click on one of them. This is what it's actually using from this layer in the whole focus stacking process. So there's no way you can do this kind of work by hand. You just can't do it. You'll never be this precise about it.
Why use this last equation?
This is not perfect. If you do a ton of focus stacking, there is a dedicated program called Helix to actually do this that does a better job of it, but this actually does a pretty good job. When you run into that problem, you can go in and you can actually do hand work on the masks to get rid of that part. So you need to go in and find the mask where that's a problem, because it's adding something that shouldn't be there. You need to mask it out, and then you need to reveal it in the frame that should be included in it. Make sense? Yeah. Okay. But it's amazing how well this whole thing works. The resizing thing, it's nuts. It's out of control. So I'm going to close this up. We're going to look at one other thing really quickly. Robin, I'm going to show you, I'll show it to everybody really quickly. And then we're going to try to get panorama done in 3 minutes. If you go to our session 14 and click on your folders in here, there is a PDF about hand coloring scans. If you open this up, Robin, this is what you need to look at to see how you want to. If you want to hand color your black and white photographs, this walks you through the process of exactly how to do it. Okay, it's relatively simple, but it takes a real command of understanding color. I mean, you're literally going to go in and paint the color in on this, but it shows you how to do that digitally. Okay, so if we've got time, we will look at this next week, but if we don't, I don't want you sitting around waiting for this. It's just this one page. So take a look through it. If you have any questions, let me know. Okay. So last thing that we're going to do here really quickly, again, I'm going to go back to my week number 13. We're going to look at panoramas. The advantage of doing panorama work is that it can actually build great backgrounds for your compositing. So if we take a look at the background image, I'm just going to show you. This was actually a set of files that were done by Seth Resnick. He's a really famous stock photographer out of Miami. The only reason I have these files, because these are copyrighted by Seth, so don't use these anywhere, because he's the kind of person that will find you and come and make your life miserable. But we're in an educational context right here. So again, I got these at a workshop that Seth actually did on using Lightroom. So if you take a look through these images, basically what it is that Seth has an apartment in Miami. He went on the very top of his building on the rooftop. He pointed his camera so the sun is setting in the west. He pointed his camera to the east, and he just did a series of shots, of 7 shots, handheld. He's not using a tripod. He's not leveling this out, which is how most people who are serious about doing panorama work. But literally, bang, 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 going from the southeast to the southwest. He's also got his camera on automatic. If you actually take a look at this, as he starts to get over into the sunset, because there's a lot of light, his camera's set to auto exposure. It changes the entire exposure of the little village that's down there. I mean, you couldn't ask for a worse thing to try to put together in an image, but that's what we're going to work with. So to do it, again, we start in Photoshop. Come up to the File menu, down to Automate Now, and then down to Photo Merge. and it'll bring open that dialog box. Click on the Browse button to get to those raw files of Seth. It's not in the focus stacking group. It's going to be in the panorama files. And again, it's a set of JPEGs. There's 7 or 8 of them. Just hold down the Shift key and select them all and click on Open. You'll get to a familiar dialog box. Again, the type of layout that happens on the side, you want to go ahead and pick Auto for this. The reason that you would pick a different version of this, you guys should know this, is that let's say I'm not doing landscapes. So let's say, again, you're going to hear this on the recording, you won't see it, but let's say I'm actually in this room, shooting in this room. And I've got my camera and I'm pointing at this wall right here, the wall that's to my left, and I'm going to just do a sweep around the room. The wall that's to my left over here is 15 feet away. But by the time I get to the back of the room back there, it's twice the distance away. So I would go bang, really close, not as close, not as close, further away, all way far away, closer, 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 close again. That introduces distortion. And if that distortion happens, these other perspectives, the other way these images get put together, can actually help not have as strong of a distortion. So if auto doesn't work in the scenario that I was just talking about, I would use the perspective one instead, because you can see what it's saying is it's going to make the stuff on the edges larger. So it would make this thing, actually that's wrong. I would do just the opposite of that. I would do the no, it would stay with this. So the images on the sides are larger and the one that's in the middle is smaller. So you can try all of these other ones to see if you get less distortion in here. The one that's at the very bottom is that if the Photoshop can't actually find where these things should overlap, the one at the very bottom takes all of your files and puts them on basically what you would consider to be a light box, and you get to move stuff around. When stuff gets in register that Photoshop can tell, it will actually then signal that. You'll get this line that shows up, and you'll know to actually drop the image in that place. So it allows you a little bit of manual control. But in our case, we can leave this as auto. Again, down at the bottom, I'm going to go ahead and check blend these images together. You do not want to check vignette removal. This is for really super wide angle lenses. We don't have that in this image right here. This geometric distortion correction introduces geometric distortion. Don't use it. And then finally, the content aware fill. We can actually go ahead and check on that guy and then simply say OK. So this is going to take a lot of the other steps that we did manually out of the focus stacking out of the group. It's going to do it more automatically. And Command D to deselect. But look at this. And you will not be able to find where this has actually been intersected. Couple things that are actually happening here that you should know about. Number one, the content aware fill at the very top did fill in areas, so you can see there's a lot of transparent areas in here. The reason these transparent areas exist is because when he did his panorama, he was not holding his camera perfectly level. He actually drifted up from the lower left-hand side up to the upper right-hand side. And as a consequence, he's got image content at the top, but he doesn't have it for the frames that he started with. The reverse holds true as well. He doesn't have stuff at the bottom that he did have in the beginning. So that's problematic. The content aware thing does an okay job of filling part of it. It does a good job for the sky. It fucks up the lower level right down here, the lower right-hand corner a little bit, but we'll get to that in just a second. But what it does that's really remarkable is that it knows that the water in this image is moving. And so instead of taking multiple frames to make the water, it knows that there's movement between frames. So it isolates the water in a single frame, and you can actually find it. I think it's this one right here. You can see that the majority of the water is done in a single frame because it understands that there's movement between successive frames, even though he shot these extremely fast. And therefore, to eliminate the ghosting that happens as a consequence of that, it does it as a single frame. So this is a good way to actually start things. To finish this, to gild the final lily in all of this, We're going to take a look at the image that is at the very top. I'm going to do a copy of this one, it's the one that had the content aware fill done at the very top. So I'm just going to Command J that so that I can work on non-destructive. It's going to be destructive on this layer, but I keep the original one. Then I'm simply going to zoom into this image, and we're going to look. It's this problem down here at the bottom. I am going to go to the pasteboard using the F key. Then to fix this, I'm actually going to use the clone stamp tool. The S key will actually give it to me. I want a medium hardness on my clone stamp tool, so I'm going to go to a 50% on that guy. I am going to keep it 100% opacity in normal blending mode, 100% flow. I am going to be working on only the current layer because I've got it right here. And basically what I'm looking for is an area that already exists up here that I can use to replace this area right down here. And I'm actually going to go after this area that's sort of like got the tall palm trees that are sort of running along the side. That's where I'm going to start. So I'm going to hold down my Option key, click to actually set that as my point. And then I'm going to come down to where this is actually changing. And I'm simply going to run this down. I'm going to cover all of the water, and I'm going to get the treetops up at the very top of this. And again, the treetops are what are allowing me to sort of blend that in organically. And that part works pretty good for me. The water part here does not work for me. So to blend the water out so there's less of a line there, I'm going to go to the Healing Brush tool. And make it smaller or make it larger. And again, I'm going to sample something. I'm going to set a sample point further out, and then I'm just going to run it across, not that edge, but this edge. And you get the idea. You spend another 10 minutes with this and you're done. But look at that panorama. That's ridiculous. Questions about this? So, two things to think about. Number one, everybody thinks about focus stacking is all about macro work. I had a student in this class who was really into coffee bars, and he went into these coffee bars that were tended to be really long, deep rooms, whatever, and he focus stacked the coffee bar. So he had a cup of coffee sitting 2 inches from the front of his camera that was tack sharp, through the entire room that was tack sharp, all the way to the barista that was making coffee, all the way at the end of his photograph that was tack sharp, and then he printed these things almost the size of one of those single panels in there. And you walked in and you looked at it and you're like, and there's something really different about this image, and you didn't know what it was until you realized that it was infinite depth of field. It was sharp beginning all the way to, they were insane. Anyway, so I'll see you guys next week. Oh, but as long as you're here really quickly, I just want to show you this action shot. It's only going to take 1 second. I'm going to stop this recording.